All right, everybody. Welcome to Power Comics. I am Evan Husney, and this is...
This is Gabe Dikel.
And we wanted to do just a quick video. If you're like clicking around the internet somehow randomly, finding yourself at the Power Comics page, we wanted to do like a video looking at what is a Power Comic. Because it's not just the name of our channel, it's also the name we've given to describe the comics that we love. Isn't that fair to say?
That's exactly right. It's our designation.
It's our designation. So all the comics that we talk about on this channel are called our Power Comics. That's how we refer to them, and that's how we believe they should be referred to for all time. Starting off, I wanted to kind of start it with like our journey through how we discovered Power Comics, because you and I go way back with Power Comics. It's probably about 10 years now, which is hard to believe.
Right.
10 years since we launched on Tumblr, which is insane. Now we're on Instagram at power_comics, and on Patreon at patreon.com/powercomics, where we're actually uploading the full issues of our discoveries and finds, where you can download those and read them. But basically, a Power Comic in a nutshell is a DIY self-published comic book, preferably from the 1980s. It does creep into the 90s, early 90s, early to mid 90s. And in the very rare occasion beyond that. But it's basically, I don't know, how do you describe Power Comics?
For me, one of the main elements is that it's an attempt to work within the convention of like a regular comic book. You know, it's not just an outsider, or it's not just a underground comic like R-Crumb or some of these guys. It's not...
Right.
It's not like a zine necessarily. There's an element of it that is these artists and creators want to be conventional and want to work within the confines of, they're fans. They're comic fans, and they're doing their best to create. They're looking at the greats and they're saying, "I want to do this. I can come up with it," and they're really trying their best to execute it, for better or worse.
Totally. And I also think that the big gateway drug for a lot of these guys was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like when Kevin Eastman, put that out, and it was like this black and white comic that everyone felt they could achieve. It was something we could do. We didn't need the large studio Marvel DC behind us, so we could do it ourselves. There's a DIY element to that. So I think everyone tried to kind of recreate that because it was also very financially successful. So I think I just want to look at like how we got into it first, which is through this comic book, I think, which is totally safe to say that New York City Outlaws is a big one for us. And this is the first issue. It's drawn by Ken Landgraf. His name is now, very synonymous, and he's gained a lot of popularity in the indie comic scene over the years. And this comic now is actually worth upwards of $50, which is kind of hard to believe, 10 years ago when we could find these for $1. But what's cool about this is obviously Ken Landgraf is really inspired by the Warriors. And just when you look at this, there's such an amazing, just DIY quality about this whole thing. I love how there's just like this like guitar ad right off the top. And it's just getting right into just this awesome quality where he's obviously a really talented artist, but there is a quality to New York City Outlaws where it is very tactile. And, the perspective is a little shaky, but I think that's what makes it really cool, right?
Yeah, it's, and it's important to point out that, Ken has worked in the industry. It probably, I don't know if he's still working, but, he's worked for big name publishers. I don't know who published this. I can't remember.
Outlaw Comics. He did himself.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So it is self-published. So,
yeah.
But, it's not necessarily, outsider art, especially stuff like this. It's just these people with such singular visions, and really, Ken is a good example of a comic that is almost like from another parallel universe. Like this could be like a huge budget, a huge running series in the, bizarro world,
Totally.
And it's so he's got such an incredible style, and the story's so insane. And yeah, I think the first time you showed me this, I was like, I can't believe not that people don't know about this,
Right. Which, yeah, now people are sort of catching on. And this is obviously very accomplished for some
Right.
of the things that we're about to look into. But I think it's just this kind of DIY spirit. I love the trash and vaudeville ad here in the
Oh
back,
my God.
which is
My God.
amazing. And just the kind of like self-publishedness of this is what we kind of gravitate towards too. These like guitar ads are amazing, and just like how like there was a certain time where you could catch Ken at a restaurant. I think it's issue number 2. It says like you can find me at this restaurant. Write to care of me at this restaurant to get more issues. So there's just something about that I think is just the spirit of DIY comics that makes this so cool. And for us, it was like when I saw this, it just opened up this world that whoa, there's this whole other underbelly of self-published rare comic books that are totally unloved, and
Yeah.
we need to discover them. Underappreciated. We need to find them, and we need to put them together in some sort of curate them in some sort of same space so people can check them out. And that's kind of how Power Comics was really born. And then this one you also have to mention as well, which is again a little too accomplished for your average power comic because it's so freaking crazy in its style. But I don't know how to pronounce his name exactly, but Ragnas is what I call him. I think he's just,
Ragnas or
something like that.
I don't know. It's got a very Power Comics name.
He does, but he's I think he's Scandinavian and he. Yeah, man, this obviously again very accomplished, but just so maddening in its detail, and that in itself makes it singular. Like because this is way crazier than anything you would see published by the majors. I feel like, and I mean, to my eye, I don't know. I'm not an expert on
Well, this is somewhat like if I feel like if he were to present this to an editor at like a big publishing house, they'd be like, this is so hard to look at. You're very talented, but you gotta pull back a little bit. You gotta actually think about composition. Everything blends together, but it's so
look at that, unbelievable.
It's so amazing, and he's so talented, and it's his own vision, and it's untouchable.
Yeah, and I think it's also just like, the obsession with one's own work and vision and the meticulousness of it and the desire to, and how much you spend, in your own universe and getting high in your own supply, is definitely is what makes it Power Comics to me. But again, it's at the higher end of accomplishment for what it is. And obviously the subject matter, this crazy sci-fi story with mohawks and chainsaws and, muscles and that's a huge defining aspect to it too. I mean, these aren't like, drama comics we're looking at here. So again, Damlog and New York City Outlaws were kind of the gateway drug for us in terms of like, oh my God, there's this whole other world. What is there? And then that led us to, before we get to Savage World, that definitely did lead us to Jontar, which I think was the big awakening moment for us, where we both were like, holy shit, this is on another level. This is like kids now making comics, in their teens and high school years, trying to make, what they perceive to be acceptable indie comic work, but instead it's so amateur and so outside the normal palette for comics that it becomes something onto itself completely.
Yeah, and that's kind of my real
sweet spot.
Sweet spot is like the really, really kind of out there outsider art stuff. The stuff that like I was just looking at, I think Hell for Leather, one of these other
which we'll get to in a minute here.
And it was like there's 4 panels that I couldn't decipher. I sat there for 20 minutes and then it clicked that it was like, oh, that's a guy putting on sunglasses in like 4 close-up frames. And it's like, that's what I live for is how did they, and what's interesting is like, Ken Landgraf, Ragnas, whatever his name is, you could appreciate their singular vision, but when you get to something like Jontar or some of these other super outsider ones, that's when you can really appreciate how difficult it actually is to make a comic book.
These have to exist so you can appreciate.
Yeah, this is
like
someone
Damlog.
really, really trying to make stuff make sense, and it just shows how hard it is to actually do this stuff. It really makes you appreciate the real
totally
artists out there. And not to say that this isn't. I mean, I love this stuff, and Jontar is one of the best stories that there is. One of the most out there
Yeah.
characters. But it kind of the more outside the convention of comics, the more interesting it is to pick.
We should talk about story too, because the story of this comic, I think what also makes it very evocative of being a power comic is this is about a male stripper, a male dancer, who also works as a garbage man, and then he finds an elf in a trash can while he's working his sanitation side job.
and so far we're pretty conventional here, so
yeah. and then of course he gets involved in this murder plot with his his friend who's a gym owner who's coming out of the closet simultaneously, and then Jontar dies defending him, and Jontar gets transported to this elven world where he's reborn as this vigilante hero who likes to ricochet bullets off his swords, which is something that shows up routinely in every Jontar issue, is the ricochets.
Yes.
So obviously there's like an obsession with certain weird particular details, and that is what also makes a power comic. And a good tag team partner of Jontar is Savage World. This is the same artist, but made 2 years before Jontar. So now we're taking somebody who was probably 17 making Jontar, and this is now a 15-year-old drawing this. So now we're even getting even more out there and more crunched and atrophied and frustrated. That's one thing too we should talk about, is the frustration. Our motto here that we've kind of encapsulated these power comics is the line where enthusiasm meets frustration, and I think that's exactly the best way to describe what these things are. And it's just amazing. It's like, we all drew comics and weird stuff in school like this, but these guys got it published somehow 35 years ago.
I think you described it at one point as like a atrophied comic, like someone trying to make a Spider-Man, but it's totally atrophied, and it's art and its story. And I mean, that's what's so funny. The best power comics have really interesting plots,
really singular design.
Really. They're so special. This is, and you look at a lot of stuff being made today or throughout the ages, and it's really technically proficient. It's really well done, but it's a convention, and it's like it all kind of looks. There's exceptions to the rule, but there's a style that people conform to, and then you get this stuff that's like, it might be rough, but holy cow, they're doing really interesting stuff,
Totally, and there was a time and a place for this too. I think it's a bygone era as well. Like with this, it's like, this could only exist, like something like this, like Blood and Magic. This could only exist, I think at the time it was made, because if it was made now, you have the internet and there's a self-awareness and an irony and all that, and this is completely devoid of all that. This is like guys making things totally in a vacuum. Which I think is art by fish. I think a lot of like spelling errors and stuff they just couldn't check at the time. Eagerness, very lack of patience, an eagerness to get going, a quickness, a hasty pace. We always kind of talk about that, like they just want the end result. They don't care about the process. And then obviously the distorted figure. The sort of distorted, sorry, there's a little bit of glare here, but the kind of distorted figure, the distorted interpretation of body parts and anatomy. I'm not sure that these artists really care about the end result. No. It's just get it out there, Yeah, and it's this bizarre, you're right, and it's this bizarre interpretation of anatomy, and the untrained artist. The untrained artist... And Ben and I were talking about in other videos that the untrained artist is so much more interesting to look than at the trained artist. And that's just so evident in all these books. Then there's like these superhero genre, which obviously you see a lot of in power comics, because it's just obviously it goes hand in hand with comic books in general. And it's just amazing. I've definitely woken up many times feeling like Peter Risk, Monster Masher. I know. Such a hangover superhero. Such a frustrated grimace. But yeah, I mean, all this stuff is just, it's so onto itself. I mean, there's nothing else quite like it, and it's just really cool to see. So I wanted to shout that out. And then obviously there's also this tension that you get when you're examining certain power comics, where it's like, is it a power comic? Is it too good? Because sometimes it's just like literally like we'll go, deep, digging through dollar bins or online to different e-tailers, and we're looking at going through all the publisher listings and looking at different things, and we're just like, oh my god. And then you finally find something because the cover looks alluring, and then you get it, and then you open it, and you're like, oh, this is too good. It's too good, or it's too self-aware.
Yeah,
and when
exactly.
when it's not aware of itself is when that's the magic. And something like Guardians of Justice and the O-Force, like I legitimately love. Like I think it's an amazing, especially because it's it's in color, which is rare for a power comic. But the thing that's really cool about it is like if you really, as cool as this is, and as amazing as this character design is, and this fire and how it leaps off the page,
Right.
like if you're really like kind of looking at it like, there, you can tell like looking deep into the anatomy, and you kind of see that this is a little rough around the edges, and that's what's like really exciting,
Yeah, there can be like really, technically well executed stuff, but it's still got that handmade quality to it. It's
Totally.
very. This comic has incredible coloring, some really great drafting, amazing art, but it's still a little wobbly. And the back cover
Wobbly.
is that amazing, never to be published comic with a huge spelling error. What is it again? It's coming soon.
Yeah, coming soon. Oh, actually, hold on. Sometimes you'll get really you get really lucky when you're looking through stuff, and you're looking through this, which looks like a pretty innocuous sort of indie thing, and then like you flip over to the back and you're just like, oh man. Oh man. And that's the sweet spot, like this arm and the frustration of this arm and the way that it sits on his frame is exactly the type of frustration that we're talking about. And that's the wobbliness that
and his like burnt toupee that he's wearing.
yeah. And just how charming this is, how absolutely freaking charming this is why we're here today. That's why we've gathered.
And the art in Thoris Verd is like alternative magazine from the 90s sort of
it's not
aesthetic.
as like it's not like as I thought at one point it was interesting, but it's okay, but it's just it's not quite there for me, like
right.
It's funny I think, but it's not this.
I'm gonna buy every I have bought every Thoris Verd just because of this back cover of this. I need to own them all.
Yeah, I know. Totally. It's so funny.
And to kind of what you said before, though, I have a bunch of power comics that I had, bought on one of our excursions or, buying online that I thought were not good. And then years later, just going through them because I
they've marinated
and still kept them. Oh my God! Actually, no. These are actually worthwhile. It's really interesting how you kind of sharpen your power comic eye there.
Yeah, it's totally. And then of course a big quality too, which we talked about, and I pulled these aside because these are admittedly drawn by 15-year-olds and actually created by 15-year-olds, and that's another genre. Is just the 15-year-old mind is something that you don't really even want. You don't choose to examine. As an appreciator of art. But I think this is that medium for that, is to like, okay, this guy's 15 and this is where his mind's at, and these are his ideas, and they're charming and they're amazing, and and this is actually quite good for a 15-year-old.
Yeah, at 15 I was like doodling trippy drawings on like a fish mixtape or something. This kid is created this. It's incredible,
Yeah, I was making mini disc covers on my ballpoint pen. But yeah, so there's that, and obviously Private Ice too, which we Ben and I just recorded 47 minutes on the other day.
Unreal.
But and this too is admittedly by 15-year-olds, and this thing too, which makes it really outsider to me, is that it's riddled with inside jokes, and it's literally like it's impossible to understand because you're not them. And you don't know, like, where they're going and what they mean by any of this stuff, because they're like referencing their friends and their characters, their inside jokes they've made and things they think is funny, haha, stuff. But yet the art is just so still very singular and hilarious in so many different ways. And one of the scenes that I call out here, which makes it so enjoyable, is these guys get into a fist fight, one guy knees the other in the face, and they get into this whole skirmish, but then, on the next page later, inexplicably, they're sharing a spaghetti dinner together where one's slurping down a noodle, and there's nothing in between, which is hilarious and amazing. So Private Ice is great. And then Power Comics also explores the just the wild concept, the concept that nobody wants, the concept that's made for no one, which would be Kendon the Kree Warrior, except for us. We want it.
Well, and it also is not very clear on what it is. I don't know. This is a great example of what is the inspiration? Why? Yeah. What did you come up with? Yeah. Why did you think this was good enough to turn into a comic? It's so bizarre.
Right, and as you can see, this has its own weird smudgy style too, and and obviously, I think Power Comics is immediately can identify what a power comic is by just the facial structure and the facial interpretation, right. And because it is hard to draw these things, but when these guys just do it hastily and without training, it becomes apparent. But one other quality too, this comic is amazing, by the way. But one other thing too that is awesome about these comics is the very alluring kind of foreword and afterword that the artists give, where they kind of give
to bring that up.
Yeah, where they kind of give you like a little glimpse, a little tiny glimpse into who they are, why they are, and what they're doing. And some of them are so amazing.
They always put like weird qualifiers in there about what you're about to see and why it's not as good as it should be, and that's how you hit something good. If there's like an apology note in the beginning, or if they're gonna promising all sorts of future issues that just never get made.
Oh, of course, and that's another thing too I should mention is a lot of these comics, like this and like Kendar and like Private Ice, like a lot of these issues stop at issue number 1 and never goes beyond that. And that's kind of a very common, sad but unfortunate characteristic with these comics. So when a story ends and it's at the very end of the line, usually on some epic cliffhanger, the story just like pauses and is frozen in time forever, and that's just another kind of weird, trippy quality. But if you're looking at it that way, but one thing too about Power Comics is the horror genre. It's obviously definitely has its fair share of power comics, and these are two of my favorite, which definitely speak to the nightmare quality. The lack of the untrained art now kind of lends itself perfectly to the genre, because it's like, whoa, we're looking at some fucking nightmare shit now. Again, frustrated faces. I absolutely.
Yeah, this is one of the best.
One of the best. This one.
Ripped boobs.
Ripped boobs.
If your comic has ripped boobs, it's a power comic.
Male or female. And it's just, it's awesome. It perfectly lends itself to the Power Comics aesthetic and style. Again, Demon Blood. It's just like, this is so DIY. This is one of my favorite Power Comics just because of it's obviously so much tracing involved.
So traced.
And tracing like with this woman here in her dress, and it's amazing.
And the guy.
And
totally just Rosetta ripoff.
Totally. And then like the prologue here again, like we were talking about, it's so amazing how like, this guy has an attitude right off the top where he's just like, we wanted to produce something a little different than fill in the blank sword, Quest of Dragon, Lords of Orion, etc. The type. Neither we care for much fads. Anyone can produce a comic, for instance, called Preteen Parasite Protozoa with little or no pubic hair. And and then he's going into this and has a very just sort of angsty attitude towards the world of comics. But then usually when you get a prologue, you have them say, well, the artist has a lot to work on and he's not really that good, and like issue number 2 will be better, and then of course there's never another issue.
Exactly.
Which is amazing, and obviously this comic is just fucking great. Like and you can just see like such an amazing splash page. So yeah, lot to just love here. I mean, this is just amazing. So, I mean, it's no shock why we would be totally drawn into these. Amazing. And then of course, kind of the last stop of the train is the really bizarre, oversized, really angsty kind of self-published zine-like thing. And we talked about this earlier. Hell for Leather. I mean, just like this is just where it's like totally off the deep end in terms of like, you know, throw caution to the wind. Let's do it as quickly and as fastly and as hastily as we possibly can.
And they always say for mature audiences, and it's the most immature artwork and story you will ever find.
Totally.
Oh, really? It's
amazing.
Like cave art.
It is. And sometimes what you were talking about the story too is like, and Ben and I talked about this too in some of the reviews we've done, where it's like, you know, it's like reading hieroglyphics and trying to decode and decipher the story. I mean, incredible page here, but just like trying to decode and understand the story and what they're trying to communicate to us. It's like,
what are they trying to say? Yeah,
it's like an alien spaceship. It's like finding like one of those space pods in outer space, and like we're seeing another civilization's like art, and we're having to like figure it out.
It really gives you insight into like the challenges of conveying anything in this medium of, okay, he wants to say that this woman is just got cut by a razor blade and is crying now, and look how he attempted to do that. There's endless ways to do it, and this clearly isn't the right way, but it's a way, and it's interesting, and it makes you appreciate a lot of other comics.
Yeah. No, totally. I think what you're saying is like it's like through power comics you understand the deconstruction of mainstream like accomplished work, you know. But yeah, I mean, this to me is more, and one of the things too about this is like, you know, like Ben talks about it too, is like looking at this as these comics to me are more inspiring. Like to him as an artist, it's more inspiring to see work like this because it's so unfettered, unfiltered, like uninhibited. You know, this is pure, sincere, genuine, you know, work. So
yeah, it's really, and you know, it's a constantly evolving, you know, thing that we created here. You know, we're always finding new and different types of comics that fit into it. There's a very clear through line with all of them, but it's evolving all the time. And you know, if you have some that you think might be power comics, you know, let us know and
send them in to get certified. No, but yeah, totally. I mean, you know, through starting the Tumblr first, like I said, the Instagram, and now the Patreon, like there's been so many tips, you know, we've gotten, and meeting artists and people, you know, the guys behind, you know, the guy behind Crowbar and Red Bullet Comics, and you know, and getting things sent to us, and so it's just we're just starting with this journey, even though it's been 10 years and it took us that long to make videos, but you know, we're just trying to discover all these power comics. We want them all to live somewhere like in a pyramid, and you know, like a digital pyramid in the sky. So
yeah, I think the bottom line is, you know, years ago, 10 years ago, I was like, saw Jontar. I got a couple, 2 and 3, and I wanted 4, and I couldn't find Jontar 4 anywhere. And even though you can't find it, the list price is still like $2. I mean, at the time. Yeah. Now I'm sure it's more, but the idea that can exist today and be impossible to find and still, you know, technically very not worthless but undervalued is astounding to me. You know, it's
rare and worthless.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the amount, and let me just say the amount of real garbage that we have sorted through and spent our hard-earned money on to find this stuff, because the reality is there's a good amount of really amazing comic books, there's a lot of mediocre stuff, there's a ton of garbage, and then there's a very small amount of stuff that is special, bad and out there that it's good, and it's not. It really needs to be consolidated and given the time of day.
I was going to say, I think it's important that we're strict on what is a power comic and what is not, because you don't want to oversaturate it, you know, and there's a lot of stuff out there that I see people post and, you know, and share, and I'm not trying to call anybody out. I'm just saying, you know, I see, you know, certain things that to me doesn't have the characteristics because it's too accomplished, or it has too many collaborators. Like there's a staff of like five people, you know, 5 people's too many brains for power comics, you know, it needs to be like 1 to 2. in my
I
opinion.
mean, but again, we've got Silver Wolf, which is a juggernaut of
I
the
know. I know.
independent publication, and those it's like 6 people sometimes working on those, and they are
They're power comics.
I would argue that they are just as power comic-y as some of these other
Okay.
one-offs. And that's what I mean. It's a hard thing to make these distinctions, but
We have to.
it's the hard work we have to do here. But I think, yeah, there's, I don't think there is a platonic power comic. I think we can look at some examples of what we think are like the absolute best examples, and then go from there. And I
Right.
think all you can do is like look at them, read them yourself. Subscribe to the Patreon. It's really, it's super worthwhile to do that.
Oh yeah. Thanks
To
for
be
mentioning
able
it.
to just scroll through and have access to this stuff in there, because they are hard to find. They really are. And Evan has a bunch that I don't have. I have some that he doesn't
Yes, you
have,
do.
and
You
it's
definitely do.
infuriating. It's super frustrating whenever Evan's like, "Look at this haul I got," and I'm just like, and then but I have
Yeah.
the Patreon, and I can actually look at this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a real pleasure.
And that's what this is our goal. I mean, you can obviously see there's only probably a handful of issues here of what we have on the Patreon so far, but like we want to get them all up here, so then there can be some digital life of all this where you're like, I want to read Demon's Blood, and then you're able to
Right.
click on it. And I know it's not the same thing as holding it, but these are old and hard to find, and and stuff, but still we want people to be able to appreciate it in some form. And what's cool is you can obviously go in big on the art and appreciate it in a different context. So that's the goal with this whole thing, like, is to get these all in one place where they all can live and we can talk about them and laugh about them and appreciate them. And
Yeah.
that's the end goal with Power Comics.
Amen, brother.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for watching. So now you know what a power comic is. So now get your ass over to patreon.com /power comics and sign up and download some of this stuff. And if you have any, if you're sitting on any, send us some tips.
Exactly.
All right, everybody. I'm out of here. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.